Hello and welcome everyone to episode 21 of Movies You Miss podcast. How you doing today, John?
I'm doing well, V. How you doing?
I'm doing well too, and I'm really looking forward to this episode because I think it's an important topic in today's film industry climate.
I agree completely. I'm very excited that we're doing it because we're going to get into a lot of things about the reason why we're doing this, and we'll go off of a couple of different reasons why certain cuts of movies are actually better directors cut-wise.
Agreed, and that is the theme of this episode, Director's Cut, and you want to jump into why we're doing it?
Yeah, why not? Very recently, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners already know, with our sign-off, I included this as one of my Accept If You Thinks. Most recently, the director that so many people are head over heels in love with, Taika Waititi, director of Thor, Love and Thunder, Thor Ragnarok, Jojo Rabbit, has come out in the media saying that director's cuts are awful versions of movies, and that directors need to be controlled by studios. And while, to an extent, I think Taika Waititi is talented, this pissed me quite the fuck off.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, but, it gets to a point where certain directors and writers have a vision for their movies. Later on in life, they decide that, those deleted scenes that are as a special feature on the DVD, they could actually accentuate the film and move it a little quicker, maybe move it a little slower, but add a little bit more information, give us a little bit more backstory on characters, give us a little of this, give us a little of that. And while not all of them are great, I'll be honest, there's been some director's cuts that have kind of thrown me off. The pacing does change a little bit, especially if you're used to the theatrical cut, which when I first saw the Tropic Thunder director's cut threw me off because there was a bit of a pace change. One of the most infamous director's cuts is, of course, Apocalypse Now. We have Apocalypse Now, the theatrical, we have Apocalypse Now Redux, and now we have Apocalypse Now, the final cut. And I've seen all of them. I have the 4K version of Apocalypse Now, and while I like all three of them, the final cut is the superior cut, and that's the one that Francis Ford Coppola has stamped his most seal of approval on. So this happens a lot. Sometimes it doesn't always get labeled as director's cut, but it is technically still a director's cut because it's extended, and you come to find out that the directors actually were very happy with the way that they got to re-edit their movie. So, going back to Taika Waititi, I just feel like he may have said that, and it very likely could have been out of jest, but there hasn't been anything, he hasn't come out and said that that was just a joke. A lot of people know him from, like I had listed off those movies, but I think he exploded onto the scene with the What We Do in the Shadows movie that came out a few years ago. I turned that shit off. I thought that that was absolutely horrendously unfunny, and I just don't understand why he felt the need to say something like that, but at the same time, he could have just kept his mouth shut.
Well, and what a blanket statement to make over 100 years of filmmaking.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
And that was my biggest problem with it, is that there's been so many directors in this industry, so many movies created, and you're just going to make this blanket statement about how film should be made. And that really struck a rather ignorant chord with me. But what an ignorant thing to say about filmmaking, which is, as we say in every episode, it is a form of art. And so trying to gatekeep that, for me, is totally ridiculous.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite director's cuts are Blade Runner, and as you said, similar to Apocalypse Now, it has a ton of different editions, right?
Oh, yeah. Blade Runner Final Cut is fantastic.
Fantastic. Even a special edition of Aliens, which only adds a couple minutes, explains a very, very key scene in the movie.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think it's important to note that though a director is the director of the movie and you think is the end-all be-all or the buck stops with them, they answer to a studio. And so there are many times that films are being made and a director cannot have his vision or her vision seen by audiences because of wrangling by the studios.
Right.
I think Justice League is a perfect recent example of this.
I actually have not seen the Snyder Cut of Justice League yet, and I saw it in theaters, and I didn't hate the movie, but everybody else did.
Yeah.
And they're like, watch the Snyder Cut, and I still have to. It's been on my to-watch. I know it's a 4-hour cut.
It is.
But I don't mind that, especially if it's a director's cut, and that's the vision that they truly wanted to get out there, then let's give it a shot. Like, give them their due, Like, if you didn't like the original, give the director's cut. Watch it. See what's up.
I think that's also a great example of how a different director changes the tone of a movie completely.
Right.
And Joss Whedon versus Zack Snyder are two very different directors, have very different visions, and the two movies that ended up are completely different movies. I mean, they have the same characters in them, and that's about it, actually.
That's right, yeah. That's Joss Whedon took over Justice League because Zack Snyder's daughter unfortunately committed suicide, and that's why he left.
Yes, exactly.
That's right, yeah. So that was the other reason why I wanted to give it a shot, because I have never not liked Zack Snyder. I've never been like, the guy sucks. I love Dawn of the Dead remake. I love 300. No, I got to give the director's cut a shot at some point, and it's still on HBO Max, and I do got to watch it.
I think because film is a creative process, clamping down and putting guardrails on how the finished product is made is incredibly just narrow-minded.
It's just strange to me because when we were discussing picking a director's cut, I had several that I wanted to do, and I was texting you the night that I was jumping on Close Encounters. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this one. Maybe I can do this one or this one or this one. And my original director's cut was actually going to be Amadeus by Milos Forman, and we're going to do that one in the future because you haven't seen Amadeus yet. So when we do another director's cut episode, it's either going to be that or it's going to be Independence Day, which Roland Emmerich did a director's cut of several years after the DVD release of Independence Day. And I got to tell you, the director's cut of Independence Day really changes that movie.
Really?
Up quite a bit. It still ends the same. There's still a lot of similarities. It makes the movie almost 2 hours and 45 minutes as opposed to 2 hours and 30 minutes. So there's a lot of scenes more at Area 51 than anything else. So that was one reason why I kind of wanted to jump in that one instead of Close Encounters, but I'm glad I did Close Encounters of the Third Kind because, well, we'll get into it. So that's my, at least, Envy's opinion on the statements of Taika Waititi. And we mentioned earlier, several episodes ago, that he was on Twitter and bashing the CGI and visual effects of his movie. And I know that, again, he comes from the comedy world, but there's just, I don't know, there was something about it that really rubbed me the wrong way when he started talking about how terrible the CGI was. And then you come to find out that the visual effects team was working on it 5 days before the release because Taika wouldn't make up his fucking mind. So, it's like, who's to blame here?
Right.
It's just irritating.
And because the director is helming this movie in a lot of ways, yes, the buck does not end up stopping with them, but they do helm the shooting of a movie. If your movie starts to get bad press, you don't turn around and blame the crew. You're the fucking director.
Yeah.
You don't do that. And, similar to being, say you owned a bakery shop or something, or you're a small business owner. The business is being run the way you want it to, and so if it starts doing poorly, you can't turn around and blame your employees for not working hard enough or being slackers or what have you. You're the fucking business owner.
Right, yeah.
And so for that for me is like when he started getting negative reviews for the movie, which is kind of the first movie he's had really negative reviews for. Ragnarok did really well. Everybody really enjoyed it. Jojo Rabbit's incredible and it's Oscar nominated. What We Do in the Shadows even, it's very specific kind of comedy. My mother really likes that style of comedy with like Jermaine Clemens and those guys, Fly to the Concourse, stuff like that. I can take it or leave it. It's not terrible in my mind, but it's not my specific brand of comedy. But it still did well. I mean, it got him on the scene. And so all of a sudden, this first movie of his that is getting negative reviews, he turns around and tries to pass the buck. Like, don't do that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So those comments, for me as someone who loves filmmaking, those comments pissed me off to a point where we moved our director's cut episode sooner so we could talk about it.
Indeed. Yes, we did.
And it's funny your comment about visual effects, because in my movie, which was a pioneer in visual effects, the very first scenes they shot were the main visual effects with the water inside the cab.
Oh, yeah.
Because James Cameron knew that it was going to take them a long-ass time to get it right. So he shot that scene first, so the visual effects team had the most time possible to get it done. That's how a director should be organizing a film shoot.
Oh, absolutely. Or the first AD, anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of first ADs are like, no, we're going to do the night stuff first. We'll worry about the visuals later. Like, no. I've been on too many movies where, like, you know what? The guns aren't working. We'll just do CGI blood, and it looks fucking terrible. It looks so bad.
So that's why we're doing this. We both love these movies, so they were going to be on the list anyway. It was more of having a specific discussion around director's cut we thought was important to get done this summer while those comments were still fresh in the industry.
Indeed.
And so with that, we should probably kick it off.
I'm ready. Are you ready?
I am, and I believe you go first.
I do. So, getting into our episode today, this is episode 21. We went science fiction. And actually, the cool thing about my film is that it's not labeled science fiction by the director, it's labeled science speculation. And I think that's great because who knows? And I'm talking about the 1977 classic, written and directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Richard Dreyfuss, Francis Truffaut, Terry Garr, Melinda Dillon, Bob Balaban. This is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, everybody. Yay!
Such a great movie.
Oh, it's so good. This is written and directed by Steven Spielberg. Everybody knows Steven Spielberg at this point. I imagine if you don't, then look him up and do your research because he has put a lot of things on the map, most notably his use of practical effects in his movies, and the first one of those would be Jaws, which was plagued with a whole lot of technical issues because of the shark not being able to work and the shark sinking and this, that, and the other. Then we have E.T. coming about, which is a great, great film. One of my favorite memories of E.T. is going to see it at the Hollywood Bowl with my wife with a live orchestra. That was just fantastic. It would have been amazing if John Williams was there conducting, but he was not. Another pairing, actually, we have John Williams doing the score for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is a wonderful, wonderful score, and I have it on vinyl. I found it at a really small record shop in Utah when I was doing a movie. And Close Encounters of the Third Kind was one of those Steven Spielberg movies that I never saw until I was 32 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it really pissed me off that I hadn't seen it when it ended because I ended up buying Close Encounters of the Third Kind on the theatrical special edition and director's cut DVD release, which comes with a map of all versions explaining where new scenes were added, what scenes were extended, what scenes were taken out, and what scenes were restored. It also came with a booklet of production photos, biographies of the cast, and a whole lot of production insight. And
Awesome.
I've read that book I don't know how many times now. It's only like a 25-page book. It's a real quick, easy read to get through. But it's fun to kind of flip through it when the movie ends and you're listening to that incredible soundtrack that, coincidentally enough, is very reminiscent of E.T. And again, John Williams did both the scores. There's a lot of similarities there. So Close Encounters of the Third Kind opens up with a lot of strange happenings going down across the globe, not just in one city. This is happening all around the world. So the film opens up in a Mexican desert where we come across a whole bunch of missing aircraft, and we learned this from the dialogue that's spoken between a lot of these military and government types. These planes apparently went missing in December of 1945, as did their pilots. They open up the cockpits, and there's photographs, there's calendars from 1945 in these planes, and nobody knows where they've come from. They're just sitting there in the desert. We also come to find out that a ship that went down at one point in 1945 has also been recovered in a desert, and this is the Cotopaxi ship. And I learned that both in 1945, military planes such as these and the Cotopaxi actually did disappear in the Bermuda Triangle in December of 1945. So these were, in a way, historically accurate, but still have not been found, although in January of 2020, the Cotopaxi was found 35 nautical miles outside of the coast of St. Augustine in Florida.
Cool.
I know, so awesome.
That's awesome.
I thought that was really badass.
Any discovery shipwrecks I think is really fascinating, and it's my favorite thing to dive is shipwrecks, actually.
Oh, you've done
Yeah, oh
shipwreck
yeah,
dives.
yeah.
Oh,
they're
that's
my
cool.
favorite for sure.
Wow.
And I love recently reading, it's a meme. It says, when I was growing up, I really thought the Bermuda Triangle would have more impact on my life than it does today. Remember when we were kids and everybody talked about the Bermuda Triangle and quicksand?
That's true, actually. Yeah, the Bermuda Triangle was used for just about everything. So after all of this, there's confusion. Everybody's just kind of like, what the hell is going on? Next, we're taken into an air traffic control room where there's two pilots of two separate aircraft talking about UFOs that they're seeing. They don't say the word UFO because this is all being recorded. They just keep talking about how there's brilliant lights in front of them that are zipping by them and coming at them in different directions, and they're really not sure what's going on. Finally, they disappear, and the air traffic controlmen ask these pilots if they want to officially claim sighting a UFO. And I love this scene a lot because it's that moment where you can hear and feel the uncertainty of those pilots. And these two pilots both like, no, nothing official. We don't want to sound too crazy about anything like this. After the air traffic control moment, we're taken to Indiana and we meet Roy and Ronnie. They're a husband and wife. They've got a nice house. They're a very in love couple. They're a young couple, likely in their mid-30s maybe. They've got 3 children, a daughter and 2 sons. His wife played by Terry Garr, who she is great in this movie. I've always liked Terry Garr. I loved her in Tootsie. Absolutely love her in Young Frankenstein. And Roy is a field technician, and he oversees 1 or 2 of the power grids that's across the city that he lives in. He volunteers to go out on his own to check out a certain power grid to make sure that it's up and running. And this is where things get pretty interesting. When I watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind, this was, I think, my favorite scene, and it still is, because every time I watch Close Encounters, it's still the scene I look forward to the most. And it's when he is sitting at the railroad track looking at his map that is a paper map, 1977, no GPS, nothing. And then all of a sudden, bright lights are behind him, and he waves these lights forward, just like, go around me, go around me. And instead of going around him, they float up over him.
I love that shot so much.
It's so great. Because it does look like a truck.
And it's through, so it's the camera is placed on the hood of his truck through his windshield. So you see him, his windows, and these lights behind the truck. The way that is shot is so beautiful.
So awesome.
And then the lights start ascending. You're like, shit, that's not a car.
Because it happened once already when he waves the car around him and that car goes around and they say, you're in the middle of the road, jackass. And I was thinking like, wow, 1977, there were still assholes on the road.
Right?
Yeah, like Spielberg got that down. And then actually, I wish I remember the dialogue perfectly, but Roy ends up yelling at this car as they're leaving. He goes, what the fuck does he say? I can't remember. He says something about like, oh yeah, you want to help me along? Turkey! And he like screams, he calls him a turkey.
Cornbread Road south of 20. Sodium vapor street light. Power must have been restored up there. A couple hundred neighbors in their PJs like it's Saturday night out here. Dispatch, this is 411. Do you want me to disregard that Delano call?
You're in the middle of the road, jackass!
Could you tell me where Cornbread is? Turkey!
After he's waved the first car along with the road rage passenger, a second pair of lights come up behind him. He waves those on. Those lights start to float up over the car. And he's still very much involved in reading this map, and he's not really paying too much attention until his car starts shaking a little bit. All of a sudden, bright lights are shining down on his truck. He ends up looking outside at this bright light floating above him, not exactly sure what's going on. And then all of a sudden, his car just starts getting lifted up. Everything in the car starts falling around him. He's really starting to get freaked out. And this is that failed abduction scene that I think is just executed so fucking fantastically, because after the cut of Roy looking up at the light and then coming back into the car, we're with Roy the entire time his car is being lifted off the ground and then slammed back onto the ground again, and everything in his car is going all over the place. And the way they actually accomplished a lot of the weightlessness was by putting the truck on a turntable and spinning it 360 degrees really quickly.
Cool.
Yeah, so it wasn't like, I actually thought that they had the car on a crane.
So did I, yeah.
Yeah, so that a little bit of movie magic for you. But that's one of my favorite scenes, because after that, he's just sitting there completely dumbfounded, and then he sees the UFO go a little bit farther ahead of him, shine the lights, looking like they're looking for something else to abduct. He notices that the UFO is on its way out. They end up taking off. Roy decides that he's going to follow these sons of bitches that just tried to abduct him. On his journey, he's driving through desolation throughout Indiana. He ends up on a curved road, and as he's coming around the curved road, he sees a young boy in the middle of the street standing there, and this is Barry. Barry is the little blonde kid that most people would likely recognize from a lot of the earlier commercials and trailers and posters for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He is the young child that actually opens the door and sees all of the alien lights, and Steven Spielberg actually really likes this scene because he attributes it to children being the ones that would trust light like that. Jillian is there, his mother, played by Melinda Dillon, who everybody would recognize And if you don't, then you've never seen A Christmas Story. But she plays Ralphie's mom in A Christmas Story. And she's really good in this film. She was actually nominated for Best Supporting Actress for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is awesome. And we'll get into the many, many Oscar nominations in a little bit. After Roy and Jillian meet and Roy meets Barry, they get kind of swarmed by military helicopters and military personnel. They're pushed out of this part of the city. Roy goes home, tells his wife about it. She's not into it at all. Roy isn't necessarily going too crazy about this. He's just telling his wife what happened, and
He's very excited.
He's very excited. I mean, I would be too. You know, like, I think I just had an encounter. I might have almost got abducted. Who knows what the hell was really going on? I saw something, and she's just not buying it. She thinks that he's already starting to lose his mind. She's one of my favorite lines that she says to him later on as things are starting to get a little worse. She goes, "Don't you think I'm taking this very well?"
Yes.
And it's almost like, yeah, I guess you are. Roy decides that night that he's going to go up to this side of the road that he's being drawn to. And he starts being drawn to certain places in this movie after this encounter. And that's usually kind of how it goes. Like, Roy ends up going up to this cliff where there's several cars and a couple of people sitting out there. And come to find out later on that everybody is still being called by something to this specific spot. A little bit later, Roy and Jillian and Barry are there with several other spectators, and these are all people that have either seen the UFO or maybe had a partial abduction situation, kind of like Roy. We find out that Jillian and all these other people, including Roy, are seeing a lot of the same images in their head. And we later find out that these images all happen to be Devil's Tower, which is a mountain range out in Wyoming. And oddly enough, there's also some kind of communication that has been happening with the military and these UFOs, and they're based off of 5 tones. We meet Bob Balaban's character. He is a French interpreter because we also meet Francis Tufaut's character who plays Lacombe. He is a UFOologist, or ufologist is likely the correct term. And Bob Balaban also tells the military that he is an ex-cartographer. And based off of these tones and the mapping of everything, the first number that they are able to come up with is an actual coordinate, and that coordinate actually begins at Devil's Tower. So there's all these things connecting everybody to Devil's Tower, and so from there on out, the rest of the film is Roy trying to get to Devil's Tower with Jillian without any help or support from his family. He has completely gone off the deep end and off the rail, according to his wife and his children. Even his young son starts screaming at him, calling him a crybaby at one point. And this is actually a scene in the director's cut that's not in the theatrical. We're not going to get too deep into a lot of the added scenes of Close Encounters because I don't want to give too much away. Just suffice to say that the director's cut is the superior cut of Close Encounters to watch. So anyway, Roy is building models of Devil's Tower in his mashed potatoes at dinner one night. His wife and his older son start to really get upset about this. You do feel for the guy very, very early on in this movie, not just because of this partial abduction, just because he's got a nice family at home. You know, he's a good dude, and all of a sudden now this partial abduction has kind of turned him into a crazed lunatic, according to Ronnie, his wife, and his neighbors, and everybody that's spectating while he's at one point digging up the front yard and throwing plants and dirt into his kitchen window. And that's when his wife ultimately decides to take the kids to her sister's house, and Roy ends up building this 8-foot-tall replica of Devil's Tower in his living room. As the film goes on, more and more do we get involved with the military. Roy gets involved with the military. They continually are asking him questions as to, you know, are you feeling okay? Do you have headaches? Are you seeing any things? Have you had a moon burn? Have you had any encounter? And Roy's very reluctant to answer any of these questions because he doesn't know what the hell's going on, but he also knows that there is definitely something going on, especially if the military and a French ufologist are now involved in asking him these very strange questions. So that's mostly Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I don't want to give a whole lot away, especially because, Like I said, I only saw it for the first time when I was 32, and I don't know how many people out there have actually seen Close Encounters or have even seen it recently. If you have, awesome. I remember, though, the first time I saw this film, I was watching it alone by myself, and when it ended, I felt like a kid again. Like, I really was just so happy with this movie. And I still am. I still think the theatrical cut is great. I think the special edition cut is good, but the director's cut from Steven Spielberg is the ultimate version to watch of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I love the little boy Barry. He is a fantastic little actor in this movie. I think he was around 4 when they did this.
He was very young, yeah.
Stole every scene. He's so cute. And there's a lot going on in this movie. There's the government involvement, there's Roy, and then he pairs up with Jillian and Barry and all these other people. And at first, the government and the cartographer you were talking about, as well as the French ufologist, they're separate as well. And all of these stories coalesce so beautifully at the end.
They really do.
It's not a disjointed film. Steven Spielberg did a great job editing this where it doesn't feel rushed. There's nothing that's super confusing about all these different stories. You can follow each of them. And you still have an emotional attachment to all these characters, even though you're kind of bouncing around a little bit. And I think that takes a lot of talent with not only the director, but also editing specifically, to give enough time to characters so you start to care about them and you're understanding what's going on. And sometimes it's really, really hard to do that with multiple storylines.
Oh, yeah. We've talked about that in several episodes.
Exactly. And I love how Steven Spielberg did it here. I also love this movie for its ambiguity.
Yeah. Definitely.
He's very specific about what he shoots and what he doesn't. I think the director's cut is fantastic because it does add a layer to Roy's character development and how he's being affected.
Oh, definitely.
It also explains a couple of decisions by his wife that weren't as clear or at least understandable in the theatrical version.
Definitely,
I think.
yeah. It's oddly enough, I mean, if you think about it enough, it definitely, in theatrical, you're like, okay, I get it. But in director's cut, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Like, there's the dialogue edition, and you get to see it instead of, what's the word? Interpret it, I guess?
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. So, and it's interesting you say that it doesn't feel like it was rushed. Now, granted, the director's cut likely was not a rushed edit, but the theatrical was, because the studio was on the verge of bankruptcy at the time, and this was originally supposed to be a 1978 release, but the studio wanted it to come out earlier because they felt it would save the studio.
Did it?
And in a way, it did, yeah.
Oh, good.
It did, yeah. It came out in November of 1977.
And the CGI holds up being 40 plus years
And
old.
There's very little actual CGI in this movie, almost to the point where there's none, because Steven Spielberg wasn't satisfied with the way it was looking at the time. So majority of the effects are actual practical effects.
Oh, I see. I hadn't looked any of that up. That is really interesting to know. The
I was very
cut-in
happy.
is very impressive then, if this is practical effects.
It really is, and that's the one thing that really makes this movie. And again, I'm 36. I watched it at 32. I felt 5 years old again watching both of these cuts again, because there is, like we said earlier, present day is how we're introduced to the movie. And present day in 1977, I have no idea what the hell that was like in 77, but I know what present day is today, and I watched it as this was happening today. It wasn't like something that I am watching with the mindset of, oh, this is a 40-year-old plus movie now. I'm watching it with the idea of present day. Like, this is what would happen. That's why Spielberg calls it science speculation. He has deep-rooted beliefs that we have been visited several times. And so do I. Ever since E.T. and Independence Day, I'm always just like, there's got to be...
The X-Files.
Yeah, there you go. One of your favorites. There has to be something out there. I just refuse to believe that we are it in the entirety of the universe that we know exists. Exactly. Completely.
One of my all-time favorite lines from the movie Contact with Jodie Foster.
Oh.
If we're the only ones out there, what a big waste of space. I love that line. But now that we're talking about it, I think one of the reasons why Spielberg movies, especially science fiction, hold up are because of the humanizing element to all of his movies. Think Jaws, E.T., Jurassic Park. You can look back on those and be like, oh, the visual effects aren't great, or, CGI for those dinosaurs, now you can tell they're fake, where in 93 it was incredible. But there's
Still
this
incredible.
It is. But there is this humanizing element to all those films, that it is human-driven stories, not effects-driven stories.
Right.
And I think that's why his films are still incredible to this day, even though the quote-unquote present day was 40 years ago.
Absolutely. No, and I completely agree with you. Even watching E.T. now, Jurassic Park, any of those films, there is that childlike giddiness that comes about when I watch those films. And one of the main reasons why he went with Richard Dreyfuss as Roy was because Richard Dreyfuss was such a child at heart.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that Roy really is suffering, also trying to make sense of it all, like when he's building the Devil's Tower, there's a moment that he just kind of like looks around and then he's like, you know what, I just need to get the fuck out there. And it's one of those moments where, you can be involved with something on the outside, but then at the same time, you really want to be, you want that encounter, that first-hand encounter. Look
exactly.
at that. Yeah.
And I've actually been to Devil's Tower.
No way.
Yes. So in my 20s, I was a contractor for military operations for training, and did that for multiple years. Funny enough, it was a job through the film industry because we did special effects. And we did special effects and mock explosions and things like that for military training. So they hired the company I was working for at the time. And so I actually traveled. Yeah, it was really fun. And I traveled all around the country doing this to different bases. And one of them was in Wyoming. And so on our days off, I would just drive around Wyoming because what the hell else am I going to do?
Yeah.
And I had found out that Devil's Tower was a couple hours away, and I was like, oh, cool, yeah, they used that in the movie Close Encounters that I still haven't seen yet. And I drove out there, and it was so cool and it just as impressive as it seems like in the movie.
Yeah.
I was one of the only ones out there, which was really added to the mystique of that place.
That's badass.
And then I watched the movie and I was like, oh my God, that was dope. I'm so glad they used that location because it really did add. It is, a very significant piece of this movie.
Yeah.
And what a great location to choose. I thought it was definitely a value add to it.
Absolutely, and it took the location manager quite some time to find the right mountain range for Close Encounters because Steven Spielberg didn't want to use typical mountain ranges and didn't want anything to be recognizable. So Devil's Tower was used, and oddly enough, I don't know if it's still happening now, but for the longest time at night, Devil's Tower would just have Close Encounters on a loop. And
Nice.
Close Encounters is considered one of the most viewed movies on the planet because it's been playing there since the release of Close Encounters. So it's really cool. I don't know if you were there, if there was a screen there or anything like that when you were there, but I think it's only at night that they show it, which makes sense.
Yes,
because it all takes place at night when they're at Devil's Tower.
The ultimate outdoor drive-in experience, I think.
Oh my gosh, that would be so awesome. I would love to see Close Encounters at Devil's Tower.
So we have to go there
awesome.
And to Iowa for Field of Dreams.
Yes, we do. We do have to go to Iowa.
Yes. Okay, we're starting to build a list of movie locations. This is great. Anybody have any recommendations for special movie locations? Let us know.
Yes, please do. Now that Roy has built this and he's got the idea in his head that he needs to actually get out to Devil's Tower, there's a whole lot more that goes on, and I don't want to give too much away. Again, like we say here, we don't do spoilers, and we don't like to get into like every scene either. And I could do that, and I could spend another hour really breaking this movie down. But I think what we've discussed really kind of holds up and gives you a good idea of what Close Encounters really is about. The end, again, if you've seen it, is a great ending. I think it really does hold up. The special edition ending is different than the director's cut and theatrical, and on the director's cut, Steven Spielberg included his original ending, which is a great ending.
Superior.
I'll say ending one more time. So good. And the cool thing about the mothership was that the idea for the original mothership was just going to be a flying saucer, like a flat circular spinning thing, like a plate. But one night, Steven Spielberg was driving through Mulholland Drive and happened to look out at the San Fernando Valley and really liked how the lights looked that way and was like, and thought maybe it could be the bottom and the top of the mothership could just look like a huge cityscape. And I thought that was really fucking cool.
One of the coolest alien ships I've ever seen.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's one of my all-time favorites.
It really is. It's badass, especially for 1977, when Star Wars also had come out in 1977. And
No shit, that's right.
Yeah, Star Wars came out in May of 77, and this came out in November. And George Lucas was so convinced that Close Encounters of the Third Kind was going to be a bigger box office smash than Star Wars. Spielberg and Lucas traded back-end points for their movies. So who do you think won that one? Spielberg made out like a bandit after Star Wars was released.
Oh my God.
Every time I read that, I'm like, damn, Lucas. Damn. But again, 1977, how the hell are you going to know if any of these
Harrison
movies...
Ford famously talks about how they all thought that set was a fucking joke and this was the silliest movie any of them had ever made.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. But it's similar to, Keanu Reeves. He took back-end points for The Matrix.
Did he really?
Oh, he didn't get paid a ton in salary and took most of it in gross. And he took a percentage of the gross and made out like a bandit, of course.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, shit. Well, thankfully, George Lucas went on to become a multiple billionaire anyway, so it didn't affect him too bad.
Yeah. No, I don't think it really bothered him all that much. Especially
and they're good
now.
friends.
They were good friends and still are very good friends. They've collaborated on the Indiana Jones movies, as we all know.
Stop doing that.
Stop doing what? Collaborating?
On the Indiana Jones movies, because they fucking suck now. Speaking of aliens.
Speaking of aliens, yeah, exactly. And what's interesting, real quickly, on a tangent of Crystal Skull, I think it's hilarious that everybody was so pissed off that it was aliens. I'm just like, what? Wait a minute. Why are you so mad about the aliens?
Because
I haven't seen that movie since theaters.
Big difference between science fiction and metaphysical.
That's true. Okay, yeah.
Indiana Jones has always been placed in the metaphysical realm, not the science fiction realm. There's no flying or special powers or any of that stuff that comes with science fiction. This is a metaphysical series. Keep it in the metaphysical realm and people will be happy.
Makes sense. Gotcha. Thank you for that breakdown.
Yeah, absolutely. It's basically world building, and they completely did a 180 and changed what the world is that Indiana Jones lives in, and that's what really upset people, I think.
I will completely agree with that, and now that makes a whole lot more sense. I didn't think about it that way because, with the Ark of the Covenant, it's
right,
and then you have the Temple of Doom, and all right, yeah, I get you. Makes sense. So, Close Encounters, November 1977, came out November 16th of 1977, had a budget of $20 million, and that's a pretty big budget for a movie like this. Richard Dreyfuss got $500,000 for the movie. He also got a percentage of the box office. And oddly enough, he was told no by the producer, Julia Phillips. She didn't want him in the movie. And they offered the script to Al Pacino, which would not have made any sense to me. No. Could you imagine Pacino's like, Devil's Tower. I gotta get to Devil's Tower. No, I can't picture it.
He's not innocent enough for this role. Like you talked about the childlike qualities of Richard Dreyfuss, which come out as well in Jaws, I think, very well.
Oh, very much so, yeah. Oh, Jaws is so damn good. And I can't picture this other one either. Jack Nicholson was offered the role of Roy.
No. Again.
Especially not after The Shining had just come out. I don't think that would have worked out very well.
No. Again, just not an innocent quality to Jack Nicholson that was needed for this role.
Exactly, yeah. And Gene Hackman was offered the role of Roy. And I feel like in 77, Hackman might have been able to have that childlike action going on in him, because in Crimson Tide and even in some of Enemy of the State, there's a little bit of comedy that he kind of throws in there. But at the same time, majority of Gene Hackman's roles have been so serious that I can't picture him in a role like Roy.
No. Think Birdcage, Get Shorty. 90s Gene Hackman's very funny.
I do like Birdcage, and I thought he was really good in Birdcage. Everybody's good in Birdcage.
Oh, everybody's great in Birdcage.
That movie is fucking
fantastic.
Hilarious.
So, yeah, maybe I could see him. That's like 77. That's back with like French Connection, the Conversation era. Yeah. I think he might have been able to. It's just hard because he's still got a little bit of an edge to him, where when Richard Dreyfuss yells, it's expressive, not anger.
Exactly.
I think that was a perfect casting.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. After all of those actors turned it down or didn't want anything to do with it, Julia Phillips went back and reworked the contract for Richard Dreyfuss. So I don't think he actually did get $500,000. I think he got a little bit less than that. But he got a good amount of back end, percentage
Sweet.
after the release, because it did pretty well. It was actually the number 9 film of 1977.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah, and it didn't make a whole lot. I think to date, the box office gross, because it's been re-released in theaters a few times,
Right.
comes to $306 million.
Nice.
But the number 1 movie of 1977, I wonder if you can tell me what it was.
Is it Star Wars?
It was Star Wars.
Oh,
Yes,
fantastic.
of course
Okay.
it was. Yes.
Star Wars: A New Hope, Episode 4.
Star Wars:
for
A New
anyone
Hope.
keeping track.
Episode 4, exactly. And there's actually a nod to Star Wars in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There's actually 2 nods
Really?
to Star Wars. Yes, in the scene where the 3 spaceships fly over and Barry screams ice cream. On one of those ships, if you look close enough, you can see an upside-down R2-D2.
That's awesome.
Isn't
my
that
gosh,
awesome?
That's awesome. The
I
droids
think it's
are,
so cool.
I think, one of my favorite parts of the entire Star Wars universe, so that makes me really happy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And then the other nod is that Ronnie is cutting out a newspaper clipping of a couple of the UFO sightings because she, early on, there's a little bit of, I love my husband, I want to play along. And when she's cutting out the UFO newspaper clipping, there's a small article written down there about Star Wars.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Very
So I thought that
cool.
was kind of neat too. Another friends throwing each other in each other's movies in a way. I thought that
Two
was kind of fun.
juggernauts playing around. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the effects, like we had said, majority of them, if not all of them, were practical effects. The scene where the mothership comes behind the Devil's Tower and all that smoke is coming out, what happened was the visual effects guy ended up using really salty water and dropping in ink into the water, and it came out all cloudy like that, and it leveled out at the surface. So when it levels out like that and it's incorporated in, it really worked. I thought it was really good use of smoke effects. And even in the shooting of the UFOs, all of the UFO shots were done in a dark room filled with smoke so the lights could be more prominent in their illumination. And one thing that was interesting to read was that the cinematographer Vilmos Zsigmond, he shot the alien ships a little overexposed so that they could have a little bit of a halo effect also coming from a dark smoke-filled room. And when the dailies were sent to the studio, Julia Phillips, the head producer, was so enraged and upset about how the alien ships looked, she tried to have the director of photography fired. And this wasn't the first time. She apparently was not on board with this director of photography. She tried to get him fired many times. And Spielberg kept saying, no, he's staying, and he's my cinematographer. He's getting what I want. Come to find out, this guy wins Best Cinematography at the Oscars that year, so fuck you, Julia Phillips. But Julia Phillips was also, she was pushed off the movie in post-production because she developed quite the cocaine habit.
Oh, well. Welcome to
70s.
the late 70s.
Exactly. Yeah. No, but I kept reading a lot of things about Julia Phillips that really made me angry, and she wrote a book called You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again, and I'm kind of curious about reading it, but I also don't really know if I want to give her any of my time because of what I've read about her in regards to the production of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Well, if it's a little bit of a mea culpa and, hey, I had a major coke habit and I was a bit paranoid and a giant asshole
be.
during that time, that could be a useful read.
That's actually very true. Yeah, I saw that there was a book that she had written, and I was like, no
Depends
thanks.
on the self-awareness in it.
Yeah. There is a book, though, that I do want to read. I don't know what it's called. I should have looked it up, but I didn't. It's written by Bob Balaban. He kept a journal while in production of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and upon the film's release, his journal was published and released. But it sounds like a really awesome read. I would love to read a journal from the set of that movie. I think that would be so awesome.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind Diary by Bob Balaban.
There it is. Sweet. I'll have to check that one out. And speaking of writers, Ray Bradbury, who I've read several of his science fiction novels, claims this to be the greatest science fiction film ever made. Granted, this was at the time, and it still will hold up as one of the greatest in film history, I think. It's just such a great damn movie.
Yes, I agree. I like that there isn't as much exposition as in a lot of Aliens movies. I, again, like that it is open to interpretation. I like that it's a more gentle approach to Aliens.
Agreed. Yeah,
This
it
is a good
really
way to put
is.
it.
Yeah, because there's not one scene of violence in this movie.
This is a great film for kids.
Yeah, there's almost no swearing. I think they might say ass or shit once or twice.
Yeah.
It's PG rated. It's definitely for kids. Like, I would say at least 6 and up. Stanley Kubrick actually wanted Cary Guffey for The Shining to play Danny. Unfortunately, Cary was snatched up by a different movie, so he was a little bit busy. And oddly enough, Cary Guffey was so good at acting on the set of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, they only ever did one take of all of his scenes.
What?
Yeah. Steven Spielberg had a shirt made for him that said "One cut Cary" for this kid actor, and he wore it on the final day of shooting.
Oh, that's awesome.
I thought it was really cool.
What a talent. Jesus.
I know. There's a scene where Barry is crying in his mom's arms, and the fact that that was done in one take is like just so badass to hear. Like, what a professional child.
Right? Oh my gosh, that's impressive.
I think so, definitely. One of the cameos that I thought was very fascinating in this film is by a gentleman named J. Allen Hynek, and he is the creator of the diverse kinds of contact with UFOs. He came up with that whole, first encounter is a sighting, second encounter is observation of physical evidence, third encounter is contact, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and then fourth kind, which the Mila Jovovich film is named after, is abduction.
That's really cool that they had him on set as well.
Yeah, I thought that was neat. He was in the Devil's Tower sequence. He's the one with the pipe in his mouth.
Oh, yeah. No, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So pretty sweet. 1977 was quite the year for movies, though. Like we said, Star Wars came out in May, took the #1 spot, of course. Number 9 of the year was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is awesome. And we have John Williams on the score, Oscar winner for Schindler's List, E.T., Star Wars, Jaws. We also have the cinematographer, Milos Zsigmond. He won Best Cinematography at the Oscars that year. This film was also nominated for sound effects editing. Spielberg was nominated. Melinda Dillon was nominated. Art direction and set deck was nominated. Best sound, editing, visual effects, and the score were all nominated for Oscars that year at 1978's Academy Awards. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Really, really awesome. So awesome. And the film is itself, next to the science speculation and Spielberg's deep-rooted beliefs that we've been visited, this is partly inspired by a night where his parents woke he and his siblings up and shoved them in a car and drove out to a remote location and ended up watching a meteor shower for several hours.
Aw, that's cool.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. So that is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We watched both versions, theatrical and director's cut. Director's cut is the superior cut. It's only 5 minutes longer. It's not going to take your day away. But if you do watch any, and if you even want to, watch both. Watch the theatrical and then watch the director's cut and have your own comparison which one you think is better. But I think the director's cut is far better than the theatrical cut.
Agreed.
Fantastic. Well, I think that does it.
Great movie. Good pick.
Glad you enjoyed it, because this was your first time seeing it, right?
Second time seeing
second time.
the theatrical version, first time seeing directors.
Oh, awesome. Well,
Yeah.
Wonderful then.
Yeah.
So I think we can get into yours now. What do you think? Do you want to take a deep dive into yours?
Sure, and we are, yes. I chose my all-time favorite director's cut of any movie. I think it is the most impactful director's cut I've ever seen. This is James Cameron's 1989 The Abyss.
Nice.
A little bit different than John's pick, where the runtime is about the same for his movie. Like you said, it's about 5 minutes difference, but the scenes they choose are different.
Mm-hmm.
My film adds over 20 minutes to the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Let me get into the movie itself, and then I'll discuss the director's cut. The Abyss starts off in a U.S. submarine that is following an unknown object underwater. And they're all very interested because it's not making the normal sounds. It's not doing the normal speed of any man-made object. They're very, very curious about what the hell this is. And they even make a comment like, oh, well, the Russians don't have anything this fast. Remember, this is late 80s, early 90s. The Soviet Union is still around. And we're still in the Cold War. The submarine ends up being a bit too curious and accidentally hits the side of a seawall and actually crashes into these rocks and now needs to be recovered. The Navy then contacts this oil company called Benthic Petroleum that has an underwater rig, and it's this very sophisticated underwater rig that can do underwater drilling and platforming and things like that instead of having them on the surface. And these divers are nearby this wreck, and so it's much faster for the Navy just to contract these oil riggers and this underwater platform to help them try to recover this submarine and these men. These are all civilians, these are all blue-collar workers, but the Navy goes ahead and contracts them to do this and sends their own team of Navy SEALs to kind of oversee the operation. And the reason why the Navy is so concerned about this is that this is a nuclear submarine, and again, during the Cold War, so they really want to make sure that their nukes are protected. And what makes this movie special is what this submarine has encountered, and then what these people in this underground rig encounter. They are at the edge of one of the deepest trenches in the ocean. It goes 3 miles down, and they start having, speaking of our theme, interesting encounters.
Indeed.
And to complicate things, there is a deep sea sickness that can happen. These people are thousands of feet under the water. This is a very special rig. And as this Navy SEAL team is descending, this woman named Lindsay, who is played by Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, and she actually helped design this rig, explains to the SEAL team, hey, you know, there's this condition called underwater psychosis. It affects 1 in 20 people. You never know who it's going to hit, but let's keep an eye on everyone because... And then she goes and lists off all these symptoms that get worse and worse and then lead to psychosis.
Yeah.
And the Navy SEALs are like, yeah, we got it. Problem is that the leader of the SEAL team, who is played wonderfully by Michael Biehn,
Yes.
unfortunately gets hit with this deep sea psychosis. And that is one of the things that really complicates not only the recovery of anybody in the submarine or protecting these nuclear weapons, but also complicates the interactions that are happening with whatever is at the bottom of this trench that keeps coming up to basically say hello to these people.
Yeah. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
Just a little hello.
Yeah. And this movie I've loved since I was a kid. I, of course, originally watched the theatrical version, and then my father discovered the director's cut, which actually came out in 1993, and immediately recognized it as a movie-changing cut. And then that's the only edition we've ever watched since then because it's so good. What the director's cut does for the audience is not only does it introduce backgrounds of characters in a much deeper way, you get to understand these characters in a much deeper way, but you also understand their relationships too, which I think really adds to the movie. But most importantly, it adds a big chunk of time to the end of the film.
Oh my gosh, does it ever.
The ending makes so much sense. If you've ever seen The Abyss before, again, it came out in 1989. It is kind of a classic sci-fi movie. A lot of people have seen it. If you've ever seen The Abyss, go and watch the director's cut. It's called the Special Edition because it answers so many questions. There are no loose ends. It explains the who, the why, and the how of all of this movie and what's going on within it so beautifully. And it's just so much more cohesive. It's so important, and I think it makes it a much better movie.
I agree, actually. When I was watching it and some of the scenes popped in early on in the movie, because you and I had chatted about how there's a lot more exposition with a lot of the characters, and I hadn't seen the director's cut of The Abyss in several years. I think the last time I watched it was in 2017.
Oh, okay.
That was a while. Yeah, that was a while back. And when you so graciously sent me the lovely gift of The Abyss on DVD, thinking it was only the theatrical cut, but it also included the director's cut, so I didn't have to go on a search for it, which I very much appreciated.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to add to your physical media collection. Don't tell your wife.
Yeah. Well, she picked it up and she goes, "Did you buy another movie?" I said, "No, V did." She goes, "Oh." And I'm like, "Yeah." Did you buy yourself one?
I already had it.
Oh, you did? Okay, good.
Yeah. But thought it was what better gift to give my co-host than a DVD?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Of one of
well,
my
now
favorite
I
movies.
have to return the favor in the future.
Oh, yes. Okay. I look forward to that. I'm excited to see which one you'll pick come in the future.
Yeah, I already got. It's gonna be one of two.
Oh, okay. Wow, you're already thinking through. All right, thanks. I'm excited.
Yes, indeed.
No reciprocation necessary, but that is very thoughtful.
No, but why not? It'd be fun. It'd be a fun game to play.
Exactly. And I was shocked at how little it takes to add to character development. A couple scenes in the beginning, as you talked about, they're only a couple seconds long extra.
Yeah,
and
there's not much.
You completely understand these characters better.
Absolutely.
Especially the two leads. So the two leads in this movie are Ed Harris, who I love and have always thought was so cool.
When it comes to the safety of these people, there's me and then there's God, understand?
Ed Harris is most recently in Westworld. He's the Man in Black, for anyone who watches Westworld on HBO.
Right.
He's Christoph, the kind of manager of everything in The Truman Show. He's the one who talks to Jim Carrey at the very end.
Oh,
very
man.
good. He's Gene Kranz, the real-life Gene Kranz in Apollo 13, the Ron Howard, Tom Hanks movie, which is also a great movie. He is the one in the vest. That's how he's so memorable.
I read the Gene Kranz. I read a book of... never mind.
I'm actually going to say the same thing. So Gene Kranz's wife made him a vest for every launch.
Yeah, so awesome.
Have you read that as well?
I did. I read that in a book called Failure is Not an Option, written by Gene Kranz about the most Apollo missions when he was flight director. It is one of the most amazing books I've ever fucking read.
Really?
Next to Endurance by Scott Kelly, who was the twin astronaut that went up to the ISS to live for a year while his brother stayed down on Earth for a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are two of my most favorite memoir books that I've ever read.
Ooh, okay. I'll definitely have to read them, especially because I love space and NASA and space travel.
So awesome.
I'll definitely give those a shot. He's also in Gone Baby Gone, a movie you have not seen yet, but it's very good. He's Remy, one of the cops in Gone Baby Gone, and his wife is actually in that movie as well.
Oh.
And lastly, he is in The Rock.
Yes, he is.
As General Hummel.
Yes. Gotta love The Rock. Welcome to The Rock.
So good in that movie.
Everybody's awesome in The Rock.
That's true, actually.
You can't, but yeah, no. Talking of Ed Harris strictly, he's a badass in that film.
And Mary Elizabeth Master Antonio is his soon-to-be ex-wife in this movie. There are very contentious conversations in this movie. I love their relationship. It's very real in this movie. They both did a great job.
I'm switching off now. Bye-bye.
Oh, okay. Virgil, you wiener. You never could stand up to a fight.
Bye-bye. Virgil? God, I hate that bitch.
Probably shouldn't have married her then, huh?
And she is most recognizable for Kevin Costner's Robin Hood. She's Maid Marian in Robin Hood.
I would say Scarface.
It's because I don't like that movie.
Oh.
I know.
You know what's interesting? I don't think I like Scarface either. I think it's one of those movies that everybody, like when it was re-released on DVD, everybody was like, Scarface. I went and bought it because I was like, fuck yeah, Scarface. I hadn't even seen it yet. And then I put it on, and as it ended, I was like, I guess that was Scarface.
It just gives you a bad feeling. Like, you don't leave that movie happy in any way. There's no redeemable characters.
Not at all.
It's almost a sad movie to watch, right?
It is. It actually is a very sad movie to watch, especially with what happens to her character in Scarface.
She plays Al Pacino's sister in Scarface, for anyone who is curious.
And she's good in it.
She's
and that's
great.
The thing. Everybody's good in the movie.
Oh, yeah. And the antagonist of this movie, actually, he is kind of written as the antagonist, is Michael Biehn.
Absolutely.
The Navy SEAL commander, which is a character he's played in many movies. He was even in the movie Navy SEALs, which is funny.
Yes.
We talked about him a lot in our Tombstone episode.
Oh, correct. Yes.
Because he's Johnny Ringo in Tombstone.
That's right.
He and Val Kilmer play off each other so well in that movie.
Yeah, they do.
He's also been in a ton of James Cameron films. He's one of the only people from this movie who shows up in more James Cameron films.
Why is that?
I will certainly get to it. He is Kyle Reese in The Terminator.
Yes.
Great film. He's Corporal Hicks in Aliens. I love him as Corporal Hicks.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man.
In Aliens, he was so great.
Awesome.
He and Sigourney Weaver had really good chemistry. He's also in The Rock.
Is he really?
He's the SEAL team commander that comes up through the bathroom in The Rock.
Oh, my gosh.
And he's like, you follow that order. And he's like, I cannot give that order. And Ed Harris is yelling at him. And they're yelling at each other. So good.
Wow, that's awesome.
So they're in a movie together again.
Years later, yeah.
Years later. I think about a decade later.
Very cool.
And he's also Sheriff Haig in Planet Terror, which I thought you'd like.
Oh, yes, he is. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. I do love Planet Terror.
I know. Had to add that in.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. And this movie takes place underwater. About 90% of the movie is underwater.
Yeah.
And they're either in suits or they're in submersibles or they're in this underwater rig where they actually live. The sets of this movie are absolutely incredible.
Oh, yeah, they are.
It was filmed at a nuclear reactor facility in South Carolina. The reactor became the largest underwater set in the world at 7.5 million gallons.
Oh, my Lord.
Fuck.
That's a lot of water. Damn.
And before I get into the trivia of this movie, which really is the biggest piece that I want to talk about, because filming this movie underwater, of course, was a massive, gargantuan, torturous effort on everybody's part.
Oh, yeah.
I want to add a couple little things about the movie itself. I love that there's a specific scene in the movie where Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio encounters one of these little aliens who have come up from the deep trench to say hi. And she's just in awe, and it's a very magical experience. And at the very, very, very end, she's like, oh shit, I need to take a picture to prove to everybody that I saw this. And she grabs her camera, and I love that. That's so 1980s versus now. If this movie was made,
Oh, right.
someone would immediately have their phone out and be like, oh, let me record this.
I know, yeah. I like that too, actually, that you bring that up. She goes, she's scrambling for the camera, and then it's literally like side winding down.
Yeah.
That was cool.
And similar to a lot of either military operations or people who work in really close space with each other for long periods of time, everybody has a nickname in this movie, including Ed Harris. His nickname is Bud. And this one guy who loves a lot of conspiracy theories is named Hippie. The characters in this movie are great.
Oh, yeah.
And
Catfish and one night.
okay, so one night, I never knew there's this great woman pilot. She drives one of the submersibles, and she's a great member of the crew as well in this movie. And her nickname in the movie is One Night, and I never knew why. Her character's name is Lisa Standing, and so her nickname is One Night Standing. Get it?
Oh.
So that's why they called her One Night, because her last name's Standing.
Interesting. That's cool. That's clever.
Yeah, so I was always curious about that.
Huh.
This movie is directed by James Cameron, which, by a lot of accounts, is a major reason why this was a torturous set, which I will get into momentarily. But before I do, just as a reminder for our audience, James Cameron, similarly prolific to Steven Spielberg, I would argue.
Oh, definitely.
In order, he made The Terminator,
Yes.
Aliens,
Yes.
this movie,
Yes.
T2,
Oh, yeah.
True Lies,
I love True Lies.
Titanic,
One of my most favorite films.
and Avatar.
Another most favorite, which actually has 3 versions as well, and I decided not to go with the Avatar director's cut.
Glad I
It
don't
was
have
fine.
to watch it then.
It was fine. The only reason why it wasn't that great was because a lot of the scenes that were added were CGI scenes, and you could tell that they were later rendered.
Yeah.
So there was that issue, whereas the rest of the movie still looks so real. Kind of like with Close Encounters that we talked about, the practicality of everything
Yes.
really made it feel real. And The Abyss feels real.
it does, because
It really
most
does.
of it is practical. All of the actors had to get dive certified. It's very, very intense. I'll get into it now. And there is a subplot in this movie about going really, really deep. And you cannot breathe air that far down because the pressure will crush you in your body and everything. So you have to breathe fluid, because then it's equal pressure with the surrounding water around you. Right. And real oxygenated fluorocarbon fluid was used in this movie because it is a real thing.
It's real?
It's real.
Holy shit. I
Isn't
thought that was completely bullshit.
Crazy? I know. Yeah,
that
it's
is
real.
Nuts.
So,
it's odd because I've seen The Abyss, I don't know, maybe 10 times in my life.
Awesome.
And every time I watch it, it's that scene where he takes the rat and puts it underwater. I'm like, they're killing a rat on screen.
Yeah, they weren't. They used 5 rats for this scene. It was a scene that demonstrated how to use this oxygenated fluid that then propels the storyline along. They used 5 rats. Every single one of them survived. That was a real shot.
Awesome. Wow.
The ASPCA was not happy about it.
Oh, I can imagine.
This is not an ASPCA endorsed film because they say that the rats are under stress during these shots.
Oh,
but they weren't hurt.
Sure. Right.
But I can understand why people would be upset.
I definitely could, yes.
So, again, I love that we both pick movies that are similar, and then through our conversations realize just how similar they really are, similar to last week's with both of our films being based on plays and we didn't know it at the time.
Right.
Both of them have Josephine Hull, and that was total happenstance.
That was awesome.
Which was great. So this is an incredibly practical movie. Most effects are practical, which is just insane when you watch this movie and it's all underwater.
Oh, yeah.
Very few scenes involve stunt people. When there's an emergency scene in this movie where someone is being dragged underwater without a suit on, that is the actor holding their breath.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's not a dummy that they're just dragging along. That is the real person.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah. When the rig is being flooded because of an accident, that's real. The actors are really running from the water. Everything is all the actors, not stunt people, which is crazy.
Whoa. And that's cool because, watching it a lot of times in a movie like that, they'll edit it to be behind the actor running with them.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of running towards the camera. It's like there's a lot of the practical shots too without any editing that are like long shots that you're like, Jesus Christ. There's a lot of really impressive shit going down on screen of the Abyss, 100%.
Yes. And even other shots with more bit characters. So remember in the beginning of the film when they are exploring the sunken submarine and there are areas of the compartments that are flooded and people, the crewmen have died and drowned. There is a crew member who they pan to and he's got crabs on his face and crawling out of his mouth.
Oh, yeah.
That is James Cameron's brother, Mike, playing a dead crewman, holding his breath.
Yee. And the crab was real.
And the crab was real.
Yikes. That's like the moment in Hocus Pocus when Doug Jones opens his mouth and he's got the moths coming out.
Or in Candyman when he's got all the bees flying out of his mouth.
Ooh,
yeah, no.
I've worked with Tony Todd. Tony Todd's a badass guy.
Oh, awesome. I'm glad to hear that. And this is one of the first films to make proper use of CGI technology. This was a pioneering film. It's such a big deal and so well done. George Lucas's special effects company, Industrial Light and Magic, did a lot of it.
Nice.
And there's a scene where there's water being controlled into a bit of like a tentacle, for lack of a better term. And those effects would be put into use for Terminator 2 to create the liquid Terminator, the T-1000, Robert Patrick's character, which is why when I was watching this movie this week for this episode, I was like, oh shit, that does look a lot like T2.
Very much, yeah.
That's why.
That's awesome.
So this was a rigorous shoot full of problems. There were accidents. There was engineering problems. The cast and crew started calling the film Son of the Abyss.
Oh.
The Abuse.
Oh.
Life's Abyss and then you dive. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio suffered a physical and emotional breakdown because she was pushed so hard. She went through very physical trying scenes during this film. There's one scene where he's slapping her. He really is.
Oh, is he really?
There's one scene where she gets slapped and James Cameron wanted it real and he did take after take after take of it.
My God.
And it was a real slap and it was just really intense. They all hated every minute of it.
Wow.
Ed Harris had to pull over in his car at one time while driving home from set because he burst into tears because he had nearly drowned that day.
Oh, God.
And when Ed Harris almost drowned, he reportedly punched James Cameron in the face afterwards.
No way.
Yes.
Oh, my God.
He has refused to publicly speak about his experiences working on the film, saying, I'm not talking about the Abyss, I never will. He only spoke about it briefly in this documentary called Under Pressure, The Making of the Abyss, which I am absolutely watching this week.
Oh, my gosh, yes.
And Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio said, the Abyss was a lot of things, fun was not one of them.
Oh, man.
And to show...
And they're so good in the movie,
They're
too,
so good in the movie. It's
like
such a good movie.
They really are having a good time making this movie.
I know.
Oh, damn.
And James Cameron nearly drowned during production as well.
What?
Because he was underwater filming a lot of this, right?
Oh, sure. Yep.
His assistant director had failed to warn him to refill his oxygen in his dive tank before returning to the water, which, as a diver, you are responsible for your own equipment. I call bullshit on this, but whatever.
Interesting.
His assistant director failed to warn him to refill his oxygen. Realizing he was running out of air, he asked for help from the underwater DP. However, that DP couldn't hear him.
Oh, wow.
And with no one else nearby, he realized he had to get to the surface as soon as possible. So he dropped all his gear, took off his helmet, released his weights, and started swimming to the surface. One of the safety divers grabbed him, knowing that he was in trouble, and gave him his spare regulator, which is what you do in diving. You always have a spare mouthpiece, it's called a regulator, that you can hand to someone in trouble if they run out of air or what have you, or if something, there's a mechanical failure, and they can breathe off your rig as well. The spare regulator that the safety diver had was broken and only produced water. And Cameron tried to get away from him, but the diver thought he was having a panic attack because he didn't have any oxygen and held him tight.
Oh, no.
James Cameron punched him in the face and reached the surface before passing out.
Wow.
The assistant director, who was quote-unquote supposed to remind him to refill his oxygen, and the safety diver were fired that same day by James Cameron.
Wow.
Yeah. He is known as being tyrannical. He is a perfectionist. He is known in the industry as having a not fun set to work on.
Yeah.
He can make incredible movies, but apparently the experience is pretty horrific.
Yeah, it's too bad to hear. And it makes me wonder, because I was offered Avatar 2.
It would have been a rough job. I bet it would have been a great job. You would have been very proud of the work.
Yeah, to have been on it. Yeah.
Yeah, he makes fantastic films, but I mean, Kate Winslet has come out and said that he was a giant asshole, and that, you know, he didn't care that she was freezing. She got hypothermia one day.
Yeah.
You know, there are all these stories about him and really driving everyone, especially, which this is the part that bothers me the most. He's nice to people who can walk away from him. So, for example, he tapped Orson Scott Card, the author who wrote Ender's Game, to write a supplemental story to this movie. And Orson Scott Card said, he was really nice to me because he knew I had the money and could walk away. But I saw that he treated anyone below him like absolute shit.
Wow.
That for me is what bothers me the most. When you know you can be when you know you're an asshole, and because you choose to treat people different ways, that's my biggest problem.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's a problem.
Yeah. And as of 2019, this is the only narrative film directed by James Cameron not to debut at #1 at the United States box office, which is a bummer.
Wow.
This was a $70 million movie, which that was in '89. By today's standards, that's about $168 million.
Damn. So
$70 million budget back then. It made $54 million in the U.S. and $90 million worldwide. So unfortunately, it wasn't considered a flop, especially with rentals, and then the special edition was released in '93. So it has done well over the years, but it unfortunately wasn't a hit.
Damn. I guess I could see why, you know, in a way. I mean, I've loved the movie since I saw it as a kid. My dad and I watched this movie, I think it was about 8. The first time he says, you got to check this movie out. It's about underwater aliens. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And the cool thing about a movie like The Abyss, kind of like with Close Encounters, is there's hints. You know, you get a little bit of on-screen time of what the actual story's about, right? Like we see some aliens here, we see some spaceships in Close Encounters. I like movies that are like that, you know, they give you, kind of like with Independence Day, they give you some alien interaction, and then it's, you know, the humanity side of it, and then it's this, and then it's that. So I remember texting you when I was watching the theatrical cut of The Abyss being, I forgot how quickly this movie moves along.
Yeah.
For a 2.5-hour movie, to then look at my watch and be like, oh gosh, the movie's over in 20 minutes, like that was fast. You know, it's crazy. And kind of like with Close Encounters too, it's over 2 hours, and it really just flies by.
I think that's a sign of a great movie.
That as well, yeah. You're really engrossed. You're into the characters. You want everybody to succeed. There's some choked up moments in Third Kind. There's a choke up moment or two in The Abyss. And
the studio pushed hard for an Academy Award nomination for Michael Biehn as Best Supporting Actor because he goes deliciously insane in this movie.
He really does.
Unfortunately, they were unsuccessful, which I think is a total bummer because I think this is one of his best roles.
Oh, he's definitely great in it. Very good.
And this was one of the first American films to use Super 35.
Hey!
Had to let you know that.
Oh, wow.
It's also the first film to have used an early version of Adobe Photoshop.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And lastly, because this is just a glorious tie-in, accidentally, to this episode, Steven Spielberg studied the effects sequence of this film as well as Terminator 2 to prepare for Jurassic Park.
Hey. Excellent. That's awesome.
Yes.
That's so badass. Yeah, look at that. James Cameron has the water tentacle, and then 2-3 years later, he's got the T-1000, and then the next year we've got a live Tyrannosaurus Rex and some Velociraptors.
So even though this wasn't a box office success from the get-go, it was a very well-regarded movie, and again, DVD sales and things like that helped propel this into a more successful movie. This had 4 Academy Award nominations.
Oh, awesome.
Even though they didn't nominate Michael Biehn as Best Supporting, it won for Best Visual Effects, which rightly so.
Absolutely.
It invented them in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Nominated for Best Cinematography, Best Set Direction, because this is an underwater set, holy shit. Just like for sheer complication, it should be nominated for an Oscar. And lastly, Best Sound, which also makes sense. Oh, sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, the sound is good.
Yeah. So that's The Abyss. I highly recommend it as a film itself, but especially the special edition. Unfortunately, everything on streaming is the theatrical version. If you see the version that's 2 hours, 28 minutes long, that is the theatrical version. The only special edition I was able to find is on DVD, which is one of the reasons why I bought it for John, because A, he should own it because it's awesome, but also B, that's the way we were able to watch it this week.
Yeah.
So if you don't have it, hit one of us up, or my dad, because he's got it too. He's got the special edition. And
nice.
We will lend you our DVDs.
Indeed, yeah. And I think I actually am going to sit down and have my dad watch the director's cut. I don't know if he's ever seen it.
Oh, hell yeah. Let me know what he thinks.
Definitely.
That's exciting.
Really don't think he has. My dad is one of those types that, director's cut's too long. I don't know. It adds scenes that don't really make any sense. Well, let's watch this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Close Encounters. Would you sit down and watch The Abyss with Grandma?
I would. This is a very accessible movie. It's not a hard sci-fi. It's similar to Close Encounters. It is people-driven, and it's a very story-driven movie, which is great. I've watched it with my dad multiple times. A couple of my sisters who like sci-fi, I definitely recommend it to them. I would not have my nieces watch this movie, though.
Oh, no?
There are some pretty adult themes to this and violent undertones. They're talking about nuclear war. This guy goes insane.
Yeah.
There's some deaths in this film. It's a little intense. I would say 15 or 16 and above would be a good place to start with this movie.
Okay. Well, I would and have watched The Abyss with my grandmother.
Nice, of course, because she's awesome.
Both my grandparents, yes. Her,
cool.
My late grandfather was a big fan of the original cut of The Abyss, so I imagine now, he's sat with me and watched the director's cut, but,
Nice. Nice. I think so, too. So, yes, great film, and it took a lot of hard work to make this great movie, and it's definitely worth watching.
I agree, 100%. I was so happy when the director's cut ended. I was like, I'll do another day like that again where I watch both versions.
Yeah, it'll
be in the future.
I know we talked a little bit about how Close Encounters is family-friendly, but would you watch it with your grandma?
Oh, I definitely would, yes. Absolutely.
Nice. And and like we discussed, I think anybody over the age of 8 could totally watch Close Encounters.
100%, yeah. Very family-friendly film.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for listening in. We really enjoyed this episode and highlighting different forms of film, specifically director's cuts. If this is the first time you listened, we hope you enjoyed it. If you're a returning listener, thank you so much. Please, everyone, rate, review, and subscribe. Reviews are so, so important. If you can write up a little bit for us, we'd really appreciate it. And start telling your friends about this podcast. Maybe you are at a party and somebody randomly quotes a movie. Go to them and be like, hey, you're a fan of movies. You should totally listen to Movies You Miss podcasts. Or
yes,
maybe you're at a trivia night and movies are one of the topics. You'd be like, oh man, I bet John and V would know this. Movies You Miss podcast has tons of trivia. Or maybe you're on a date and it's going really, really well until your date suggests that you make a home film. You'd be like, you know what's even more fun than that? Listening to Movies You Miss podcast about film.
I agree, yes. If you guys are returning, please do tell your friends. We enjoy finding out who's listening and enjoy having that interaction with you guys on social media. So thank you guys for continuing to come back every week and listen to our sweet, sweet voices.
And speaking of every week, next week, we are diving into war movies.
Yes, we are. That's going to be fun.
It is. I'm really looking forward to it. And I picked probably my all-time favorite war film, Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson, starring Andrew Garfield. And it is available for rent from all the streaming services for $3.99.
Oh, fantastic. I do look forward to Hacksaw Ridge. That one is one hell of a film, definitely. I chose the 2001 war film Black Hawk Down, starring Josh Hartnett, Ewan McGregor, Orlando Bloom, Michael Madsen, Ewan Bremner, list after name after name.
There's so many people in that movie.
Directed by Ridley Scott. It is my favorite war film, and it is available on HBO Max, Hulu, or Amazon Prime with a subscription, or you can rent it on Google, Apple, or Vudu for $2.99 or $3.99.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to getting into that genre as well next week.
As do I. A lot of good war films out there. Black Hawk Down is the one that takes the cake for me.
Nice. Well, I haven't seen it in many, many years, so I look forward to revisiting it.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, until then, we like to close out our show with film is a form of art, and in art, every opinion is valid, except if you think.
This is my director's cut comment about the director's cuts. If you want to watch a director's cut, watch them. They're not a waste of time. Taika Waititi doesn't know what he's talking about. A lot of times the film is improved. Case in point with The Abyss, Independence Day. Just give them a shot. You know, if you've seen the theatrical before and you have not seen the director's cut, just give it a shot. Taika Waititi's got his own opinion. It's wrong.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I love that you did the director's cut version of your closing from episode 15. Nicely done.
Indeed. I'm going to director's cut all of mine now.
So you don't have to think of new ones?
Exactly.
Perfect. Well, I have a week to think of my next one. Until
Excellent.
then, thanks everyone so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.